another team in the AFC West here. Los Angeles Chargers, who have Ladd McConkey. They have Quentin Johnston, who they took in the first round a few years ago. And then they added Trey Harris to the mix this year. And Keandre Lambert-Smith, a really interesting day 3 prospect that they got. And Mike Williams is back for a second round with the team. But before we unpack some of these, the 2 new rookies, Quentin Johnston, who I just added to the site recently, I want to talk about Ladd McConkey and just have a quick gush session here, Waldman, because I've given you a lot of credit on this show, whether you've heard it or not. I've given you a lot of credit on this show and many of my shows for being very accurate and very right about Marvin Harrison Jr. as a guy that I wrote it up in his reception perception profiles. He has some minor issues at the catch point that he needs to clean up that, could be a problem his rookie year. And I was wrong to categorize it as minor. It was the biggest problem of his rookie season.
Look at the release.
There's your separation.
Great route.
Stutter and go. Gets by clean.
That is unbelievable.
Maybe the greatest catch I've ever seen.
The biggest, from his perspective. There are other issues, totally, but from his perspective, that was the biggest problem in his game. So I've given you a lot of flowers for that. I don't think you've got enough credit for coming out right after the draft. And we were actually, you and I, in lockstep on this, being like, Ladd McConkey is the rookie you want to draft this year. Got to give you your flowers on that. But overall, I am just so impressed with what McConkey put up on his rookie year film. And I actually feel like people aren't giving that enough credit to me. And you heat check me on this. To me, I thought he was the most impressive rookie on film last year. I think obviously Malik Neighbors still has the highest ceiling. I think that Brian Thomas Jr. Was awesome as well, but man, Ladd was so good as a rookie. And again, I feel like it's going a little bit under discussed.
Yeah. Cause I think what happens here is with Malik Neighbors, who I absolutely loved and adored as a player. Yeah. He's such a fine athlete and technician rolled into one. And so you see a lot of the highlight level plays and the volume come his way. So that's easy to see. Brian Thomas was easy to see because he's big, long, and strong and quick and fast. And he ran pretty good routes for what you're seeing for, all over the field. And you saw that refinement early and you're going, okay, he's going to be, here we go. Yeah. Here we go. It's going to work. He's not just on the coattails of Malik Neighbors. He's his own dude, very much so. So that was fine. But neither of them, both of them were very easy to see for most fans. What Ladd McConkey did required a little bit more nuance to see. And that's what, when Justin Herbert said early in May, like in minicamp and OTAs, this guy plays like a 5-year veteran already. We're on the same page with how we do zone routes and adjustments. It's how wide receivers read defenses, and they're reading it in the same way that the quarterback is reading that. And that takes time. That's why Romeo Doubs started off so great in camp when he's winning all these deep routes. And then suddenly all these young receivers who were looking great, they're getting into third week of the training camp, and Aaron Rodgers is going. And I know people will talk about Aaron Rodgers in the media, but Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback. It could have been any veteran quarterback going, listen, these young guys aren't going to play very much if they don't get on the same page with me. And what he meant was, when I read a defense, I need you to read it the same way I'm reading it. And when it changes mid-play, I need you to know where to be. And the only guy that was making those plays who couldn't stay healthy in the season was Sammy Watkins at that point. So who's a veteran. He's been with multiple teams and understands this stuff. So when you look at a guy like McConkey, and he's doing that in May, and then you're seeing it happen in the season, and then in the red zone where everything's compressed, and you're seeing him make those small moves that that he's just adjusting his body, knowing that Herbert knows where the ball needs to be placed and he's going to get open there. And then you have the surprising, for some people, the surprising athletic ability to get downfield, right. And his ability after the catch and all of that was strong. The only criticism I have for Ladd McConkey is something that came from my podcast partner, Brandon Angelo, who's an athletic trainer, does Angelo's analysis, does great work. And he talked about, he said, his only concern about Ladd is that he got banged up a fair bit during games. And it's because of the way that he kind of goes to the ground he allows himself to get compacted from the top down, and it causes his body to accordion in his midsection, and it just keeps exacerbating the same injury. So he's bulked up some, hopefully strengthening his core, but he also has to learn kind of how to fall, like Tua Tagovailoa had to learn how to fall, so that he could minimize the odds of an injury. And I think that's my only nitpicking thing. Otherwise, I mean, this was the mark. The Greg Roman offense is lead wide receiver is either the tight end or the big or a slot. It was Crabtree, it was Mark Andrews, and now it's Ladd McConkey. And you look at the rest of the crew, and they really didn't have a guy who you could look at and go, oh yeah, they're easily gonna be better than Ladd McConkey. In fact, the next best guy was Quentin Johnston. And we know about Quentin Johnston's tracking issues with the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he clap attacks everything, but like his issue again is that when the ball is over his head and he has to go up and earn the right position to go up and get it, he's late to do so. And then he winds up, his hand attack are awful with those types of plays. But where he might be best is where Ladd McConkey plays. That's the problem. And so he's redundant in this offense unless you put Ladd sometimes at flanker and let him play in the slot. And then you have Mike Williams or Trey Harris playing at the X. And we know that Williams is going to start the season as the X. So, it's one of those looks where McConkey is, you're full bore on this guy. And realize that this could be 100 to 120 catch player.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about him having to avoid contact. I completely agree with Angelo's note there. I said this a lot during the season. Like, I love Ladd, getting all these targets, especially in the intermediate area of the field. Like, he's so good there. I just wish he didn't have to like scrape himself off the turf seemingly after every catch, like a cartoon, like somebody gets a big spatula and kind of has to fling him up. His receiver coach, Ladd McConkey's receiver coach this offseason, Sanjay Lal, there was a story that he had been showing him clips of like Julian Edelman and Tyler Lockett, like how they avoided contact throughout the courses of their career when they were trying to stay on the field. So hopefully there can be something in that in addition to strengthening the core, but everything else, like, so good. 98th percentile success rate versus press as a rookie. I mean, that is a phenomenal mark. He trails only Odell Beckham Jr. among rookie seasons that I've charted since 2014 in terms of beating press coverage, and not a huge amount of press reps, but a non-insignificant amount either, because teams were willing to press these receivers with just the way the offense is structured. He's in the same company as guys like AJ Brown, Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson. Pretty damn impressive group for Ladd McConkey to be in, and he has that like verticality to his game. I love him as I loved him as a prospect. I love him even more after year one. I think he could be like one of the best receivers in football. And I love your point about like him working against zone coverage with timing. This stood out to me from the beginning to the end of his rookie season, literally in that last game where he obviously went for almost 200 yards in the playoff loss against the Texans. There are routes where you see these young receivers, like when they're working against zone coverage over the middle of the field, and they're running like dig routes, and it's always behind the defender because you're able to like, hey, this is where the separation is, right? Or you're just running that like the route as it's designed to be, like the straight 90-degree break. But McConkey will like bend that route so that he's in front of just showing his numbers to Herbert. He's in front of the defenders. And then he's so timed up with everything that shows the numbers, catches the football, and then can still transition to a run after catch threat. Like, that's the stuff that the best receivers in football do. That's where McConkey is after year one.
Yeah. And it's funny because he's a perfect example for an argument in favor of Luther Burden from the standpoint of what detractors say. Because last year when I had written about McConkey and saying he's going to be, I said, you don't have to take him top 10, but I'm going to put him as a top 10 receiver in redraft. And
you were full bore on that.
I was all in. So like when you looked at that, a lot of criticisms were like, well, if you look at his production profile at UGA, he was never the number one receiver. He was never this. He never had to face these types of coverage on a regular basis. He was, he was schemed up a lot, used a lot on RPOs and screens, and so how can you project that he's going to be good? And again, it's the same argument, which is like when you watch technique, you can see that those techniques aren't an accident, and that was a good example of that.
So the rest of the guys in this room in LA, you threw some out there. We as much as we love McConkey, we know he's not playing at the X receiver position. He's probably he can play outside. He was actually more productive on a per route basis outside than inside last year, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
We know he can play outside. No question. He could be a flanker, 2 receiver sets, whatever. Who is the X of this offense? Because last year it was Quentin Johnston. And I wrote this as when I wrote up his profile, I kind of called it like a micro leap from year 1 to year 2, which to be clear, the year 1 bar was in hell. Like it was one of the worst seasons I've ever charted. Some of that, a lot of that was him, but I also think he was set up to fail, like running these vertical routes, as the X receiver, which there was bro, this. There was nothing on his profile as a prospect that said he could be a day 1 X receiver and win on vertical routes against press man coverage and track the football over his shoulders. Like,
that was hot. That was people watching highlights,
yes,
and seeing the successes, but not seeing the multitude of failures,
right?
That came to get that. It's like, I mean, it was like Marquez Valdez-Scantling with less technique. At least Marquez is the X for hire. So you're right. I mean, Johnston, yeah, he did improve some. You could see some of the improvement with his game, but to me, he's probably at his best for this offense as a flanker, which means that Trey Harris is probably gunning for him. If Trey Harris isn't going to be the X, but Mike Williams looks like he's probably going to start the season as the X. But we're talking about a 31-year-old guy, or going to be 31.
How did Quentin Johnston end up being the starting X receiver in his rookie year 2 years ago? Mike Williams was the starting X receiver for 3.5 games or so.
That's right. So if you're gonna be positive about Mike Williams, you're gonna say maybe he can give us 13 games if it really works out. And maybe that translates to close to 70 catches, maybe 40 to 45. 70 targets, maybe 40 to 45 catches, maybe get close to 600 yards and 4 touchdowns. Because let's remember something. This offense, Greg Roman's offense, they and Jim Harbaugh together, they want to run the ball. They were more efficient passing last year and in receiving last year, but they threw the ball 7% less than they did the year before when those coaches weren't there. They literally changed the run-pass dynamic by 7% in favor of the run, and they still aren't at 50-50 yet. So they still got another 3 to 4% to get to an even split, which I bet is what they would like to see. So, Justin Herbert may be a quarterback that you really like, but if you're wish casting that he's going to be better in fantasy, I don't know if this is the coaching staff to wish cast that for and make an investment on. So as a result of that, Williams could have a renaissance in his age, and you're still not looking at 70 targets. And then with Johnston, same thing. You're looking at, can he get to 50? And that depends on how well Trey Harris adjusts to things, because Trey's one of those guys that when you look at him, you go, okay, there's some releases that have some nuance, and he probably had success with his release game. I don't know. Like, that's your area to tell me what you've seen with him. But I know that from what I saw, when I would project forward to the NFL, the nuance between patience and suddenness to really emphasize the footwork and the hand counters wasn't always there with enough routes. It's kind of like Devontae Adams having separation skills at Fresno State And then Devontae Adams said, it took me 3 years to figure out how to separate against press at
Yeah.
Green Bay. And now
I can confirm that for you, but based on his early career charting, yes.
Yes. And that's the thing. So Harris is kind of that player where could he learn faster than Devontae? Absolutely. But I was showing Dave Kluge and I watched him together this spring. And I was showing him Devontae Adams and Chad Ochocinco tape and saying, here's what refined releases look like. Here's what Trey Harris is doing. And they're the same technique, but they looked worlds different because it's that nuance and understanding with pacing and playing with that and how much emphasis or how much width you get with a step or how much depth you earn to really attack and make that believable. And that's where Harris can sometimes be lacking. He also clap attacks some targets like a lot of guys do. But again, he fights the ball at times. He also has some great catches. He's kind of up and down. I don't think he has a tracking issue like Quentin did, but I think that he just does what, like, say, Cortland Sutton does, which is sometimes he fights the ball and you know that you're going to have your share of drops, but he's also going to get your share of big plays. And of course, he's very good after the catch, but so's Quentin. So it's like, both those guys are really good after the catch, but neither of them, I think, are true X's. I think Harris would be the better X because of his tracking. Yeah. So you're hoping that Mike can somehow stay healthy. And I don't think that's going to be the case. So you're really looking at, from these guys, you're probably looking at 1,200 to 11 to 1,200 yards among the three receivers we mentioned, Harris, Johnston, and Williams. And then you're getting probably about 8 touchdowns out of that. That's one good player, but that's tough to pick from. You're just trying, again, last man standing.
But I think from a Chargers perspective, that you would take that, right? Because I think that you have a guy that we agree in Ladd McConkey can be a number one, where a better version of what we just talked about with Cortland Sutton, where it's one guy and everybody else kind of orbits around him. I don't know that the playing time will look like that, but I think that they can have a guy that they do that with. I agree with you about Harris that, from an overall success rate standpoint, his success rate versus press is 78th percentile. Like, it's pretty good. But then you look at the route chart and it is truly on like a small handful of routes. And I think this is something I can kind of be better about when I'm talking about players. I often say, like, this guy is a developmental, this, that, and the other. That doesn't mean that, like, when I say developmental, like, he can't, sometimes a guy's developmental and he can't play for like 3 years. Sometimes there's a guy like, I think Trey Harris could be this way, where he could maybe play early, but you're not putting a lot on his plate. Like, you're putting like, hey, go out and be a little bit sacrificial for your sacrificial X receiver, for your first maybe year and a half that you're on the field. And then maybe in time, we're loading you up as you learn to run routes over the middle of the field. You learn to time your breaks and set things up and like really tighten up your release package. That can come in time. But I do think that if you're the Chargers and if Mike Williams goes down, you're hoping that like Trey Harris can give you some Alec Pierce stuff, you know, where again, you're just truly doing these couple of things, but you're doing them really effing well. And you're, in addition to doing those things on the very few plays that we call upon you to do, you're stretching the defense out for a guy like Ladd McConkey, obviously, but also Quentin Johnston, where, look, Johnston still is not a good route runner, 5th percentile success rate versus man coverage player. He's still strong. I mean, he drops the football way too much. He's got contested catch problems. Those limitations, I think, will probably always be in his game, but he was really good after the catch in year 2. And the coaching staff was much better about putting him in those positions. He ran a lot more slants. He was much more successful on those slants, and he broke tackles in the open field, which I could probably count on one hand how many times I watched him run like a quick route in year 1 and just like get the ball in space. So my point in saying this about Quentin Johnston is that, is he ever going to live up to being a first round pick? Probably not. Is he ever going to be like a fantasy difference maker? Probably not. But I do think he can be like useful, like somebody you can play and not like be embarrassed by. And that's kind of how I sort of view all these Chargers receivers outside of Ladd McConkey.